This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Since 1985, Ana Montez had been an asset of the Cuban intelligence service. In that time, she's risen through the ranks to become one of the Pentagon's most respected voices on Cuban affairs, with easy access to classified documents. Peter Lapp reveals Montez' tradecraft and how the FBI found the proverbial needle in a haystack. To learn more about the woman labelled as one of the most damaging spies in US history, listen to episode 277. I'm delighted to welcome Peter Lapp to our Cold War conversation.
Growing up down the New Jersey shore in 1987 as a junior in high school, I wanted to be a rock star. Hairband music was proliferating down the boardwalk of Seaside Heights, New Jersey. And, a little band out of Sayreville, New Jersey called Bon Jovi was exploding. And I wanted to be the next John Bon Jovi. I wanted to be a rock star like I think a lot of high school kids do, right? They want to be a professional athlete or a rock star. And sadly, I lacked talent, good looks, practice and patience. And then when I got to college, I was really rudderless. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. And my roommate in college wanted to be a Maryland state trooper. He wanted to be a police officer. And that kind of inspired me to public service. My father lost his job pretty quickly in my freshman year, unfortunately. And he told me, he said, you might want to think about the Army and ROTC. And at that time, the Army's marketing was be all you can be. And I think it's gone back to that kind of marketing, be the best person you can be and be all that you can be. And then when I knew I wanted to go into law enforcement, I made an early decision that I wanted to go to the best in the world. And I thought then, and I still think now, that the FBI is the best law enforcement agency in the world. So that's what kind of got me on my journey, my 10-year journey to get into the FBI.
How did you find the training for the FBI? Is it quite academic?
I enlisted in the Army National Guard. And because of that, I went to the infantry basic training, the Army basic training, and then the infantry basic training. And I was, training alongside with folks that would go on to active duty in the Army. That was hard. You were not treated very well. You were yelled at. It's the whole, what you can expect Army basic training to be like. That is not the FBI Academy, thankfully. It's referred to as kind of a gentleman's course, which maybe we should, be a little more general in that. It's an academic focused academy. You have to learn how to shoot, obviously. You learn defensive tactics and physical training, but you're treated like, generally speaking, professionals. So I didn't find it rigorous, but it was definitely mentally, academically challenging. And everyone was just striving to get through it so that we could get out and get to our assignments and start, putting bad guys in jail, which is the goal of generally any FBI agent, to put bad people in jail.
And when you get your assignment, you're a little bit disappointed as to where you're assigned to, aren't you, initially?
It's a very kind way of putting it. Disappointed, yes. Disgruntled, moody. Yeah, I thought the FBI in its infinite wisdom, and I use that, kind of tongue in cheek, would put me to work doing the cool stuff, working gangs and drugs and homicide and organized crime, kicking in doors and arresting people. And I got assigned to work counterintelligence. And pre 9/11, the FBI didn't do a great job, candidly, of focusing and training on national security training at the academy. We probably got a day, maybe a day and a half, to talk about counterintelligence and counterterrorism and FISA and all these things and aspects of national security, that umbrella of national security that we were going to work. So we didn't get a lot of background in it in the academy pre 9/11. And therefore, I really didn't understand what counterintelligence was, and I wasn't very inspired and excited to go work the Cubans. But that would not last, very long. I got to do some pretty cool stuff early on that was, one of which I wrote about in the book that is not about Ana Montez, but we started doing some really cool things, and I recognized very quickly that things we were doing were potentially, not that this is like a celebrity kind of thing, but we were potentially in the news. It was a part of international diplomacy and policy, and had international implications, maybe is the best way of saying it. So that was pretty interesting. And with Cuba being such an interesting target and topic, that really started to fascinate me pretty quickly.
How were you introduced to the Ana Montez case?
My partner, squad mate Steve McCoy, who was a senior agent, we had a number of what we call unsub cases, unknown subject cases. We knew, as I write in the book, we had a lot, and I emphasize this by italicizing, how I can't say the exact numbers, but the FBI had a lot of unsub cases. These were the combination of Cuban intelligence officers that were here illegally as illegal officers. They were agents like Ana Montez was, like it appears that probably Ambassador Roca was.
Victor Manuel Roca is a former US diplomat who served as ambassador to Bolivia and was charged in December 2023 with working as an agent of the Cuban government for more than 40 years.
We had a lot of cases. So Steve had a legacy unsub case where we knew someone had penetrated the U.S. intelligence community. They referred to that person as Sergio or Agent S. We knew all these different tidbits, but we didn't know a name. And frankly, we couldn't even narrow down a particular agency of the U.S. intelligence community. The best we knew was that it was either at the CIA or the FBI or at the Department of Defense, suspect pool, about 2.5 million people.
So how do you go about finding that needle in a 2 million people haystack? How do you start to narrow that down?
Great question, and great way of contextualizing that we had a lot of haystacks and looking for a needle. We had this concept in counterintelligence of the need to know, and it's a very important concept, if you will. You've seen a lot of recent cases where, do these individuals have a need to know? And there's an argument to be made that you've got to protect classified information internally within your own people that you've cleared, because amongst us, we know that foreign intelligence services have penetrated the DIA, the FBI, the NSA, all these different agencies. And therefore, in our story, we had the tidbits. We had a matrix, if you will. We didn't call it a profile because that has a certain connotation to it. But a matrix. The right person at DIA heard what we were looking for because they had been reached out to by an analyst at the National Security Agency, a woman who we've given a pseudonym of Elena to. And Elena is a tenacious, hard-driving, intelligent Cuban-American NSA analyst who thought maybe outside the box and thought about bringing in other folks from the Department of Defense, and did so without the FBI's knowledge or concurrence, frankly. But brought in folks from DIA, and that right person heard the tidbits and said, this sounds like Ana Montez, and then verified one of those tidbits in the database of travel records within the DIA. And lo and behold, Ana B. Montez's name popped up as matching one of those tidbits pretty strongly. So this was going on outside the FBI's purview, to be honest with you. Elena was part of the need to know team, but unbeknownst to us, we didn't know that DIA had a need to know and thus had not yet reached out to them to start talking about this very close held, compartmented, unsub case that we were trying to identify. And there's good reason for that. Elena, I wrote in my book, Elena got a name of someone to talk to at DOD from one of her colleagues to try and trace down one of these tidbits. And the name she got to call was actually Ana Montez. That was the reputation that Ana had. And this guy said, you should talk to Ana Montez. She knows everything about Cuba. And Elena picked up the phone and called Ana Montez, completely cold called her, had never heard her name, never met her in a meeting. And thankfully she got her voicemail because, even as cryptic as she was planning on being with Ana, the tidbit that she was kind of reading her in on, it came from Ana Montez. Let's be honest. I mean, it was like, the oh crap moment was going to happen if they had connected. So thank goodness they didn't, because that's a part of why we have this need to know principle.
That piece in there was incredible, real close run thing there. And I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book is the detail you've got around how you're piecing together these little pieces of information, because you're originally, and this is probably a statement of that time, is you're assuming it's a male, not female. And
Correct.
then this breakthrough from this Cuban defector who mentions that there's two female spies working somewhere in the US. And also there was the breakthrough with the breakup of the Red Wasp network as well, in terms of being able to decrypt some of the messages that they were sending, which was giving you further clues.
Yeah, and sequentially, the two women comes first, but that was such a vague tidbit. I mean, honestly, by that point in time, Ana and Marta had orchestrated a breakup of their friendship because they both went on this path of committing espionage.
Marta Velasquez recruited Ana to Cuban intelligence. She fled to Sweden, who has no extradition treaty with the US, so she remains there to this day.
So that tidbit was so broad and so general that it after the fact, it's like, oh, well, of course, it's Marta and Ana. But beforehand, it really wasn't what we call actionable intelligence. But you're right, the defectors that come out, these intelligence sparks that we get, they start building on the success. Each success builds on more success. The defectors help us get onto Loretta Vispa. We get into the homes of the Cuban illegal officers. We get key. So we're able to image computer floppy disks that have decryption key that the Cubans have written and given to these illegal officers. And then that opens up the door to reading, previously encrypted messages in Ana's case to her illegal officer, who was a guy that she knew as Ernesto. And those tidbits kind of round out the matrix, if you will. But still, we probably knew that information from 1997 on, maybe as early 1998, but it still took another good 2 to 3 years to match that with a name, Ana Montez, and that's the unfortunate part of it. It still took a long time to then come up with a name, but we're challenged by going through methodically the U.S. government and try to identify suspects and reading in the right people. And we don't want to. You think back to James Angleton and how he painted this broad stroke and really paralyzed the CIA for decades. We don't want to do that. We don't want to go after the wrong person. We don't want to accuse people that aren't who we're looking for. So we've got to be incredibly cautious, deliberate, respectful of their privacy, their reputation, making sure that we're going after the right people. I mean, that's the job of the FBI. And, we know that the criticism, when things go wrong, the FBI is going to be very easy to criticize. And I think that was probably very much in my mind, is trying not to make the FBI, trying not to make a mistake and go after the wrong person.
Because you had the Kelly case, didn't you, with Hansen?
Yeah.
Where somebody appeared to fit the matrix,
Right.
but it was the wrong guy, and he really suffered.
Yep. It eventually killed him, I think. I mean, he had a heart attack, and that you can argue that it eventually killed him. And then Richard Jewell, who was the person of interest in the bombing at the Olympics in Atlanta. And they made, I think, a movie was made about the guy, and he was identified by the FBI as a person of interest, and it turned out that he was not. It was Eric Rudolph, and those two cases were definitely in my mind in terms of, let's make sure we have the right person first. Let's put the horse first and then the cart, and not vice versa, and try to prove espionage before we've actually solidified that we had the right person. And DIA, to their credit, Scott Carmichael in particular, who remains a good, someone I think highly of, they were convinced when they gave us the name that she was committing espionage, and they were 110% correct. We had to prove that, and that's where the two different agencies had kind of different missions, if you will, or different perspectives that had to, be kind of married up as the investigation progressed.
Yeah, because Carmichael had questioned her a number of years before, as a potential Cuban agent, and didn't appear to find, it enough there. Although the way the interview went was a little bit strange, in so much that she never actually denied at that interview. She sort of steered the conversation away from that, I think, from what I remember anyway.
Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell wrote about that interaction in his book, Talking to Strangers. Ironically, his chapter is called The Queen of Cuba. And no, I didn't steal the name of my book from Malcolm, but they really focus in on that interaction and how it was misread, and do we default to a position of trust? We want to trust, our coworkers, and but after the fact, after Ana is arrested, Scott certainly reflected back on that interview from 4 years earlier, and definitely there were some indications that she, her demeanor and what she was saying and how she controlled the room, that, after the fact, he definitely he finally had his aha moment. And I mean, in Scott's defense, he didn't know all the little tidbits that we knew. And therefore, he gets an allegation. Someone saw her behaving oddly. Anna's an odd person to this day. And was armed going into that interview with a very limited amount of information. And I think he did the best he could given what information he had. Of course, 2020 vision is perfect. It's clear. It's not basic perfect. It's clear.
Absolutely. I mean, I was interested to read you mention Svetlana Tumanova in the book, because I did interview her in episode 288 and 289, which was a really fascinating insight. But I think you mention her in terms of the fact that, something like 93% of US enemy spies since the 1950s have been men rather than women, which sort of threw you off the scent to some degree.
So at the FBI's Washington field office where I worked, that office, because of all the U.S. government agencies that are within the D.C. area, has probably arrested the vast majority of spies. And there are, I call it the wall of spies. There are mugshots that adorn the fifth floor of the Washington field office where the counterintelligence division is. And the vast majority of those folks are, number one, baby boomers, number two, white, and number three, men. And yeah, the majority of folks that have been arrested by the FBI over the years have been men and there's that's maybe a whole other podcast. Like why is that?
Yeah.
We've I've talked about that. I taught about that at Georgetown at a class, and we started really going down that rabbit hole. And I was like, wow, this is really, I've never thought of it this way. Like, why is it? Because women are, in my opinion, smarter than men. They're smarter to not spy, or if they do spy, they're smarter at getting away with it. Is it traditionally, women have more of a, the homemaker role in addition to working, where they're picking up kids from daycare or getting them off the bus. And, it's hard to do dead drops when you've got to get your kid off the, I don't know. I mean, there's a whole lot of very interesting whys to that, but we also have to look at the fact that the ratio of men versus women in the intelligence community is still, pretty heavy skewed towards men. And it's working in the intelligence community, whether you're at the FBI or the CIA or NSA, wherever. It's a really demanding career. And even the women who do work for the Bureau, for example, they tend to be single because they're kind of married to their job, because the job is so demanding and very difficult to have a personal life outside of it, which is kind of a shame, to be honest with you.
I mean, I think the other aspect of the book, which I enjoyed, is you sort of do share what your personal pressures are and what's going on in your personal life as well, and what you're having to deal with there, and that sort of brings to life what you've just said there about the pressures of working in the intelligence world.
And I did that because this was not like a memoir. I didn't want to, I don't think my life is memoir worthy. I wanted to write a dual narrative. What I hoped was, a lot of the FBI has been criticized pretty heavily since 2016. Agents have been doxxed and named when they're just doing their jobs. And I wanted to the degree that I could, humanize what does a typical FBI employee, do, say, live like, look like, all that kind of stuff. And what are the challenges that they have? And it's obvious, but for whatever reason, a lot of folks out there just want to beat the heck out of the Bureau. And I wanted to try and humanize what your typical FBI employee is and does. And hopefully that came across in how I wrote Queen of Cuba.
It did. It definitely did. Are there any particular challenges about navigating internally if a potential spy is a superior or in a high-ranking position?
Yeah, look at Charlie McGonigal.
McGonigal was the head of the FBI's New York field office's counterintelligence department. He was arrested in January 2023.
I actually worked for him for a period of time. He's going to be sentenced this week, not to espionage, but to being, on these IEPA type charges, having gone into business with Deripaska, a oligarch of the Russian Federation. His level, certainly senior level, certainly probably insulated him from any scrutiny. Ana wasn't at a senior level per se, but her reputation that, and I'll put air quotes around Queen of Cuba reputation as an analyst and an expert and a go-to person, I think really did insulate her from scrutiny, security type scrutiny. I mean, the day of her arrest, her boss said she was my best analyst. So whether, she was the number 2 person at DIA or in the senior executive staff or just the best analyst in this group, I think her reputation really did provide a blanket around scrutiny. And Scott even, kind of going back to that interaction that he had with her when he got the name Ana Montez and he got the tip and the odd behavior, he pulled her security file and personnel file. And he's like, this woman's going to be the next director of the DIA. And that's probably, hyperbole to a degree, but she had that kind of reputation. And therefore, when we do investigate people, we want to do this we want to anonymize them to the degree possible to take away bias But at a certain point in time, you're going to have to drill into their personnel file and their security file, and then you have to look at that person objectively and not be skewed by the fact that they're the senior executive of X or, the senior analyst on Y, and try to analyze the behavior objectively without letting their level or reputation come into play. And that's often hard, but we have bias in anything we do, especially in insider threat, in my opinion.
You were saying a while back, and we have sort of digressed a bit there, but you need to make sure it's Ana. How do you do that? How do you make sure you've got the right person?
So in all the tidbits that we had, the Toshiba computer purchase from October of 1996, we knew the Cubans had tasked Sergio or Agent S to buy a specific brand, make, and model, time frame, dollar amount from an unidentified store in a town called Alexandria in a state unknown. But we presumed it was not Alexandria, Iowa. So this, to me, and this is where, my kind of mindset came in as a street cop, trying to just do the basic investigation. How do we prove that she purchased that computer? Because if we could prove that she did, then to me, she was Sergio. She was Agent S. There's no question. So November, we started an investigation. October, we started an investigation. November, February, we get the FISA.
The FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and it's an authorization for electronic surveillance or a search warrant. It needs to be approved by a judge who looks to see if there's just cause for the surveillance.
It's April that we finally got to her credit records and went to a CompUSA in a town called Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of DC, obviously. And we found the sales slip for the Toshiba 405CS. That is our eureka moment. So Steve and I went down to that CompUSA, and within 20 minutes with the manager, found the sales slip. Wow. And it was kind of the O.J. Simpson glove. Like, if the glove fits, you can't acquit, and this glove fit perfectly. There was no way that anyone else could be Agent S or Sergio. We knew in that moment we had a healthy degree of skepticism, because I think that's what FBI agents should have. But we knew in that moment that she was Sergio. And then from April until her arrest 10 days after 9/11, the goal was to catch her in the act of committing espionage, proving that she had committed espionage. But in April, we knew we had the right person. Scott, we called Scott all happy and proud, and he said, "Yeah, congratulations, you're where I've been for the past 6 months." And it was kind of a funny moment, but we had to have this healthy degree of skepticism, and that's the moment. That's our eureka moment, is finding that sales slip. And it's a moment that I'll remember forever, because it was like proof we had the right person.
Were you worried at any point there was going to be wider involvement from her family? Because she had family members who were in the FBI, and potentially you must have been worried that this was going to be another John Walker case.
We weren't, frankly, and I say this candidly. I've become pretty close with Anna's family and hold them in high respect. In that point in my career, my handcuffs were very fresh, and I would have had and Steve is in the same boat, even though he was a lot more senior at the FBI in terms of years in. We would have had no problem arresting fellow FBI employees if they were involved.
Ana Montez's brother and sister, Tito and Lucy, were FBI employees. Tito was a FBI special agent, and Lucy was a long-time FBI language analyst and translator who'd actually been working on Cuban counterintelligence.
So I put that caveat out there by saying, we didn't turn a blind eye just because Tito and Lucy were in the air quote family. The intelligence that we had originally showed that this was a solo person. And we had intelligence, the Kendall Myers case, that was that, Kendall and his wife Gwendolyn were arrested in 2009.
Kendall Myers is a former US State Department employee who, with his wife Gwendolyn, was arrested and indicted on June the 4th, 2009 on charges of spying for Cuba for nearly 30 years. He was convicted of espionage and sentenced to life imprisonment in July 2010.
That intelligence comes from the same place that the Montes intelligence comes from. And that showed that there were two people working together that were committing espionage. We didn't know how, quite frankly, until much later. But the original intelligence showed us that Ana was a lone wolf, and then everything we heard, listened to, read, all the things that we did during the course of the investigation showed that she was operating in and of herself. And then, it's when we talked to her, we actually were planning on using the family as kind of the hook. I was, at least, in the confession. And when we were going to drop that, we never got to that point because she lawyered up, but she said to us, look, I know my family and I know they would never do this or stand for this. So, it was that last piece of validation that Lucy Tito and Joni, Tito's ex-wife, were not involved in this. And they're good people. The sad part is the unrepentant damage that Ana has done to her family. And she's never really apologized to them for the hurt she caused them personally, not professionally. Their careers never suffered as a result of this, thankfully, but personally, their integrity, their values, how they were raised by the same parents, that's been harmed pretty significantly.
I mean, she's quite unusual in so much that she's an ideological spy rather than for financial gain, which many sort of other cases are. I mean, she was only paid in expenses, so right. She expensed, I think, the laptop, but this wasn't for financial gain. This was for, well, in her view, she was defending Cuba against U.S. aggression.
Yeah, and I've described it as being more anti-American than pro-Cuban. She's disgruntled at our country and what we've done over the years, intervening in her mind in places that we should not have. I think she doesn't see herself as an American. And I think she actually is a woman without a country in a large way. She's told us when we talked to her back in 2002 that she sees herself as a citizen of the world, whatever that means. I mean, I don't know. I'd like to see that passport. But it's this. I'm really attached to no one, and I'm a free agent almost, if you will. And it's a really an anti-American kind of rationale. I mean, I know it fits in best when you look at all the different reasons people can commit espionage. It fits best into the ideological compartment. But to me, she's an anti-American, and why she did what she did. But that's my opinion. Others may disagree, frankly.
So you get a warrant so that you can search her flat without her knowing. But the first time this is done, there's a bit of a screw up.
Yep. One of the reasons, and I appreciate you bringing that up because, in fact, any interview I've done, that's not come up. And I wanted to, again, humanize the FBI. Mistakes are made. I feel like, some of the people that have talked about this case outside of government have really kind of, from the peanut gallery, like to throw stones. And I wanted to say, mistakes happen in the real world. We're not here writing a John le Carré novel or in Hollywood, where there's a magic ending. In the real world, shit happens, and people make mistakes, and it's how you adjust to those things. And in that moment, yeah, there was a mistake made, and Ana found out that well, she came home to find one of her locks unlocked and the other lock broke. It happened. It was a mistake. It wasn't intentional. But the guys that did that, they had done hundreds of these types of things. And I think it accents not just the humanizing of these things in the real world, what when you're in the arena doing the job, how difficult it is. But at the same time, it also shows that we had the most fulsome surveillance of a person that you can have that existed in 2001. The thing we could not do was read her mind. Thank God. I don't want that mind detection software. I don't want a vendor to create that because I don't want people reading my mind. But as much surveillance as we had against her or around her, there were still so many things that we didn't know. And how was she thinking about the key? What was going on in her mind? And that was a big mystery that we didn't know until we sat down in a room with her and started talking to her post her plea agreement. And there's another mistake that I highlight, towards the end of, a couple of days before her arrest, not to preempt a question you may be intending to answer, but I wanted to show the warts because I hope that people would take away my messages that I'm trying to convey if I showed the mistakes that were made, and the truthfulness behind that.
Yeah, it does show the human side, and that things do get screwed up. It's not all Hollywood. One of the things that there's so many bits that I really enjoyed about this book was your flaps and seals team.
Yep.
That you bring in when you're having to go through a premises without letting the owner of that premises know that you've actually been in there. Can you just describe a little bit as to what they do?
The dust bunnies. These guys are so, and I'm sure, gals as well, they're so good. It's funny because I was, as the co-case agent, but as the lead agent on those entries, the black bag jobs, technically I was in charge. The reality was the experienced flaps and seal agent who was there, he or she, and I mean, it's a he was definitely in charge of keeping me from getting caught and keeping us from getting caught. And they're magicians. They're very good at what they do. I was surprised I could even mention flaps and seals until I did some research about what's already been published. And I had to think about, when I wrote the book, I had to think about what's going to get through the government's censoring, the government's, black highlighter. And I was like, oh, there's no way I can say flaps and seals. And then I did some research and I was like, wow, I actually can. And they deserve a lot of credit for helping me and Steve to methodically go through her apartment and deal with the dust bunnies and deal with, removing dust from a piece of something because, Anna's not cleaning her apartment and cleaning, well, she's cleaning her apartment, but she's not cleaning the closet with the 14 old purses that she had kept from, 1970 or whatever it was. She wasn't cleaning the dust off those. So a lot of risk there. And our biggest fear was her really learning that people had been in her apartment. And that was part of the big cat and mouse challenge that I enjoyed pretty significantly.
Yeah, because I guess, and it's difficult to get through an interview like this without mentioning James Bond. But, I'm thinking of, placing a hair in the door frame or something. And so that then if the door's opened, when the person comes back, they notice that the hair's not there. I mean, it must be minute detail these guys and girls are trying to avoid those sort of traps.
Yeah, and there's a difference in terms of your thoroughness. And I mean, this is obvious, but let me highlight to your audience. Black bag job, you're trying to get in and get out without being detected, finding what you're looking for, but you can't rip the place apart. You got to leave it as you found it. During the criminal search on September 21st, we found when we could tear the place apart, a very odd James Bond-like trap. We found a CD-ROM, an Encarta Encyclopedia CD-ROM that was tied together with a Walt Whitman poetry book, and it was stuck between like blankets or sheets or towels. I can't remember, in a laundry closet, or where she kept her extra linens. And I can guarantee you, if we had found that during the black bag jobs, we would have been like, well, this is really odd. And we would have had our hands all over it. And, to the degree we were being very careful, it certainly would have been suspicious, and it would have drawn our attention. So, to a degree, I'm almost thankful we didn't find it during the covert searches, because it would have jumped out at us, and I would have put peep prints, I think, as I wrote, all over it. And, who knows what magic she would have had to have been able to figure out that those aren't my fingerprints; those are somebody else's.
Because you talk about eureka moments in the book, and I think we've talked about them in the in the chat that we've been having today. But I mean, you go into that flat on the first covert visit, and you have those eureka moments, because what I like is you talk about, you find the shortwave radio that she's listening to on the windowsill. So you have a very careful look at that. And then you think, well, she's going to have, the bedroom's quite small, and the information she's going to need to note down or decrypt the messages she's receiving is going to be nearby. And so you look under the bed, and there is your eureka moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Owning a shortwave radio in and of itself is not a crime. And a necessity for a Cuban agent or a Cuban legal officer. It would have been really bad if we didn't find a shortwave radio, because we knew that the high frequency messages were coming in, and we couldn't prove that she was receiving them, but we did see very suspicious behavior where the next day she would go to a payphone and call a 917 area pager number, but couldn't prove that belonged to or was in the control of Cuban intelligence, because because of that need to know and to be very careful about identifying who. We knew the pager number and we knew where it was purchased out of, but if we showed up with some kind of document saying, hey, we're the FBI, give us the name of who you sold this pager to, that potentially the next phone call from them could have been to that guy who purchased it, and that would have been perhaps a Cuban intelligence officer, and it would have been game over. So the shortwave radio was definitely needed, not criminal in and of itself. That computer, that Toshiba, is the reason she went to jail, and she knows it. She knows that, but not for the contents that were deleted, so she thought, on that computer. She wouldn't have spent a night in jail. She may have been she probably would have been fired. I mean, Scott and DIA would have had enough to fire her, but just firing someone, you never would have heard her name, and we would not have learned what she did without getting into her apartment, getting that computer, finding what was on the computer. And that's what the FBI does. I mean, this is a team effort. DIA gets their credit for identifying her, and this is where the FBI should get its credit, because these are the tools, the skills, the techniques that the FBI has, and that's why people know her name. It's both agencies, not just one versus the other. It's totally a team.
So your people make a copy of Anna's Toshiba computer, and you've then got access to those files, and rather than a eureka moment, you have an oh shit moment.
Yeah, it was both. It took a couple of days. It took a couple of weeks, actually. We gave a copy to another government agency, and we asked them to look for spy dust, electronic spy dust. And instead, encryption, camouflage, all these kind of unique spy things that they have the expertise to look for. Instead, what they came back was just pages and pages of text and a diary, 11 pages in Spanish, single spaced, from Cubans to her, from her to the Cubans, and it was 95% of the affidavit of probable cause that led to her arrest. I mean, it proved national defense information. It proved passage to a foreign power. It proved to benefit Cuba. It proved all the elements of the crime that we needed to, and it gave us a sense as to what kind of things she had passed. Perhaps not in the 17 years by that point in time, nearly 17 years, but at least in the window that she was typing and receiving messages from the Cubans on that. And again, without that computer, she would not have spent a night in jail, in my opinion.
So we're moving in. Well, we're in 2001. 9/11 happens, and on the 16th of September, she goes to a payphone.
Yeah. We did. There's a picture in the book. It's the only surveillance picture we had of her making a payphone call, and completely unbeknownst to us, she makes our surveillance moments before or just moments after that picture is taken, and we didn't know it. Another mistake, if I'm being honest. And what I think that moment captures, that mistake captures, is her dedication, her commitment to what she's doing. Think about it. Probably a normal person would have not made that phone call, and perhaps would have ran away. And if they made surveillance, if they felt like they were being followed and were all but assured that they were under investigation, the last thing they would have done would have been to make that payphone call. And she, because she's committed, had a message, a 2-word message that she believed she needed to tell the Cubans 5 days after September 11th. And that was that they were in danger of being attacked, in her opinion, by the United States in response to 9/11. And the reality of that was inaccurate. But when the Queen of Cuba, the senior expert on Cuba at the Department of Defense, is telling the Cuban intelligence service, you're in danger, that opinion would have carried a significant amount of weight to the Cuban government. And, we watched her make the payphone call. We didn't know that she knew about it. It was a 2-word message. It wasn't espionage per se. It may have been, if that's all we had, perhaps that would have been a lesser charge, like the charge that Ambassador Rocco was charged with, being an agent of a foreign power, if that's all we had. But it was incredibly damaging and significant in terms of the timing after 9/11. I mean, you see where her loyalty lies. It's not with the United States after 9/11. It's not like, okay, I'm going to scale back and maybe not conspire with our enemies. Not that Cuba had anything to do with 9/11. But maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe I should, be on Team America 5 days after 9/11. And in fact, her instinct is to call the Cubans and say, hey, you all are in danger. That's who she is. That's who Ana Montez is. And that's part of why I wrote the book, and part of what I want the reader and the American public to know who she is and what she did.
Now, 5 days after that call, she's arrested, but even though she knows she was under surveillance, she doesn't make any effort to destroy the laptop or destroy any other spy paraphernalia that she's got. Did she ever say why she didn't do that?
She thought that the computer had been wiped. So she misassumed that it was clean. I had a chance recently to rewatch some of the debriefing of her, which was kind of a surreal moment. I hadn't watched it before because I was the dark-haired guy sitting at the table right there, and back when I had dark hair, and it was interesting to hear her in her own words, because my memory is she knew how damaging that computer was, but to hear her say, yeah, that computer is why I went to prison and why I'm here. And you could feel the weight, the not the guilt, but like, man, if I just had gotten rid of that computer, I wouldn't be here. More importantly, she didn't try to leave and flee. And although she wouldn't have been able to, we wouldn't have let her leave the United States. We didn't have an arrest warrant. It's not like we had probable cause in our back pocket in the form of a signed arrest warrant by a judge. We had the probable cause, but we hadn't been able to talk to attorneys to say, yeah, you've got probable cause. Go ahead and go arrest her. But she didn't try to leave and flee. And I think that has always struck me as, I don't know that I fully know why she didn't try. I have an opinion, and my opinion is I think that would have been the last biggest decision she ever would have made in her entire life. There's no turning back from that decision. If you say the gig's up, I got to go, and try. If you're successful, let's say you get to Mexico and the FBI doesn't, grab you off the plane. You get to Mexico City and then you're able to get to Cuba. You're not coming back in 3 months if the coast is clear. It's over. So that final decision that she made, not to leave, was probably the last biggest decision that she had to make in her life. And it's an interesting dilemma, because she never tried to leave, but she had the capability. I mean, we found 4 crisp $100 bills in her closet and in a bag, kind of a getaway bag that had maps of cities throughout the world. So, easily could have tried to get to Dulles Airport and jumped on a plane to Mexico City, but the FBI we wouldn't have allowed her to do that. It'd have been a little cluster. It'd have been a little, maybe Keystone Cop-ish. That plane's not taking off. What's your authority? Yeah. We have none. Let us get with an attorney, but it would have been a little clumsy, but it wasn't going to happen.
So she's arrested on September the 21st, 2001. Can you take me through that first meeting with her and the arrest?
Yeah, I talked about this at the Spy Museum the other day at an event. And I kind of reflected back on it. It's 10 days after 9/11. It's 3 weeks after my son is born. None of us are getting any sleep. It's a chaotic, stressful time, professionally and personally, for me at least, and everyone else that we're working with. And surreal because I knew we had planned for this day forever, well, for 10 months. But we never called her Ana Montez. We called her our code name that I had come up with, which was just, kind of lame and a throwaway. It was the least worst choice that day in the computer system, Blue Wren. So anytime we referred to her even in the squad area, when everyone knew her name, to mask the subject, that need to know principle, people didn't need to know Ana Montez. It was Blue Wren. And that day she went from Blue Wren to Ana Montez. And that was like kind of a surreal moment. She had been the target of our investigation for 10 months. We had only seen her from afar, but I had been in her apartment. We had listened to her phone calls. We listened to the microphones, all these different techniques. And here she was in front of us and not walking out, but in handcuffs. And the moment was, can we get a confession out of her? Can we get her to admit something? And from hello to lawyer, I need to see a lawyer, took all of about 4 minutes. Which is not the goal, by the way. That's not the goal.
No.
Yeah, no. Kind of not the goal in it. But it's in my mind, she had prepared to meet us far longer than either Steve or I or the FBI knew her name. I think she had planned for that day from the very beginning, hoping it would never come, obviously. But like, well, what if I meet the FBI on their terms? What am I going to say? Her brother's an FBI agent. She was an avid fan of Law and Order, so she knew her rights, very smart person, and therefore, was more prepared for us to meet us than we were prepared to meet her. And that's my own personal opinion. But she didn't give us anything that was incriminating or damaging from an evidence perspective.
Now, what the information that she'd revealed to the Cubans was, potentially a death sentence for espionage.
Yeah, part of that.
So,
yeah, but yes.
But with espionage cases, you want to avoid having a trial, because then, you're limited in the information that you can use in that trial. So you come to an arrangement with the lawyer and Anna that she needs to give you all the information about what she's been doing in return for, was it 25 years, I think?
That was the agreement was 25 years. The reality was she did about 22 and a half. But yeah, 25 years was the agreement.
And what was that 7 months like of sitting in front of her and going through that? Did you get any more insight into what she was like, and did she show any emotion or anything about what she'd done?
So for me, the novelty of being in the room with Ana Montez, convicted Cuban spy, part of history, if you will, that novelty wore off pretty quickly because I had to interact with Steve, and I had to interact with her interpersonally. And we were very professional. We really went out of our way to treat her with kindness, professional. For example, she had to be handcuffed coming to and from, the courthouse. But once she got in our room, and the room was not huge, but we're not talking a very small room with a light that's swinging overhead. And, it's not like what you see in the movies. It's an interview room. We unhandcuffed her, and she could walk around and pace around if she wanted to, and drink plenty of water, and was treated like a professional. And it was not appreciated. She felt tortured by us. And I'll put air quotes around torture because, it was ask a question, answer it. Here's an apple. Ask a question, answer it. Would you like some salad? It's like this was not torture per se, but for her, betraying her friends and not having the guts to commit suicide or not take a plea, for her was torture. And she really was torn by having to talk to us because of the plea agreement, but knowing that she was hurting the Cubans who she described as her friends. And that for her was very difficult. But I can agree that interacting with her for 7 months was very difficult, for me at least. I don't know. I think Steve probably had a different opinion, but I just really didn't like her. And it was hard for me not to, kind of wear that on my sleeves. And although I treated her professionally, maybe I wasn't as mature as I am now. And I had a hard time with what she was going to do regarding Afghanistan. And that really just kind of pissed me off.
Yeah, because I think you ask her whether she would have provided information about the U.S. plans for Afghanistan to Cuba, and she confirms that she would have done if she'd had access to that information.
Yeah.
And I think you probe her a little bit further, don't you, on that?
It was a hypothetical, and this was, we went down a couple hypothetical roads, which helped us, I think, come to an ultimate judgment that she likely was telling us most of the truth. There's no truth serum. She was polygraphed, and we knew the polygraph was going to be argued one way or the other because she'd already beat a polygraph. So we had to have little nuggets of questions that we knew the answers to, but she didn't know we knew the answers to. And we had those, but these hypotheticals she went down, like she could, like when we asked her, where are you going to spy against Afghanistan? It never happened because she was arrested. So she didn't have to say yes. She could have easily have said, no, because she knows the emotion that the whole country had. She knew she was free on November 11th or September 11th, and like knew how this country was suffering from that tragedy. And I think to go down that hypothetical road with us, it angered me, but at the same time, it showed me that she was telling the truth because she was saying things she knew it was going to piss people off. And it did. But, Afghanistan had nothing to do with Cuba. There was no benefit to Cuba other than they would have perhaps traded the intelligence that she gave them. But she said that's the risk those people that were going to Afghanistan took. And I find that to be very un-American. And it's still hard to really not get angry over, to be honest with you. Even to this day, it has a tendency to kind of get me a little choked up and upset. So that's where, the Jersey thing, where I wear my emotions on my sleeves, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Because she did show some sort of empathy for you about your personal circumstances, which I found quite surprising. You mentioned that.
Yeah, I tried to look at her, not black and white, right and wrong, good or bad. I try to look at her from a different perspective, and there's a law enforcement way of looking at her, and I think there's maybe a different way. And I think she's a complicated person. She's not all bad, just like I'm not all good. So all of us have degrees of complications, and I think that was an example where she did genuinely seem to be interested and empathetic to my own personal, with my son's health and my former wife's health at the time. And I don't think it was an act. I think she, she does have an ability to care and be empathetic. It's just who are you empathetic with? I mean, she likes to think she was helping the Cuban people, but let's be honest. I mean, she was helping a totalitarian regime. And therefore not really helping the Cuban people. What did they benefit from her intelligence? In my opinion, nothing. So I think that's she did show empathy to me, and I wanted to kind of try and be, where she earned some positiveness. I tried to be very non-judgmental of her in what I wrote, as best I could, lay out the facts and let people come to their own conclusion. But it's interesting. I mean, I see interviews that I do, or things on her on YouTube or wherever, and you start looking through the comments, and there are a lot of folks out there that admire what she did. And she's told people that she is, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but that she is recognized and spotted in San Juan, and people come up to her and thank her and appreciate her.
Wow.
Yeah.
Pete, the book I really enjoyed. It's a great read, and it gave me so much more insight than I was expecting, because as you say, there's your personal story, which I know is not a memoir, but it shows, that when you're doing a job like this, you still have another life that you've got to deal with. It gave some great insight into the tradecraft. I mean, we only just scratched the surface there of the some of the details that are in there. So really appreciate you putting the book together. Now, what we are doing is we are going to be doing a book giveaway on this episode. So I had the book up on the shelf, but you didn't notice it, Pete.
I saw it. I didn't.
Okay.
It was very coy. I liked it.
Yeah, that Quantico training is still there then. Huh?
It's a blessing and a curse. You see everything. It can be a curse too.
Well, I'd noticed the guitar on the back wall. I'm hoping you're going to give me a bit of Bon Jovi to end the episode. But the book's Queen of Cuba by Peter J. Lapp. There will be information in the episode notes about the book giveaway, so do check that out. And they will be signed copies of the book as well. So not just any old book, they will be signed copies. So do check that out. And there'll also be a link in there if you're not feeling lucky to buy the book as well. But Peter, really appreciate you coming on, and really fascinating chat.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it. I hope that people enjoy it. I'm proud of it. No, I appreciate the talk, the conversation, and how well read you were on the topic. You asked some questions that I had never been asked before, so thank you very much. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Don't miss the episode extras such as videos, photos, and other content. Just look for the link in the podcast information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous support of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening, and see you next week.